Good afternoon, I'm Jeff Armand, coming to you from Victoria Falls World Challenge Pigeon Race. We're going to talk about Hotspot 4, which took place over the last weekend, together with what our preparations are for Hotspot 5, and we will be showing some very interesting statistics on our trackers. So to start off with, just to orientate those that don't know much about the country Zimbabwe. This is Zimbabwe here. It's a landlocked country in southern Africa. To the south of us we have South Africa and Johannesburg over here. To the west we have Botswana. To the north, Lusaka, Zambia, and Mozambique to the east. I'm just going into a little bit more detail about our location. The loft is situated at Victoria Falls. Livingstone, the town of Livingstone is in Zambia. The town of Victoria Falls, which is basically hidden by the red dot, is on the Zimbabwe side, and the loft is situated here. It's right up in the corner of the country. And it is on the Zambezi River, which is one of the longest rivers in Africa, and starts in Angola and goes right through to two major lakes, ends up in the Indian Ocean on the other side of Mozambique. So our race route basically flies in this direction here, or from this direction, and you can see here the Hotspot 3 is shown there, 4, 5 and the final over here. The area that the pigeons fly up through, in this area here we have the Wangi National Park, which is 14,500 square kilometers in extent, which is 5,600 square miles. It has extensive water holes for animals, wild animals to drink from, and if the birds happen to be going through that area, if they're pushed by the wind, there's quite a lot of surface water available. The race route goes up through this area here, and I'll show you on the next map. Okay, just showing you a little bit more detail, the river lines. I spoke about Wangi National Park being here. It's a wildlife area. The two main river lines that can be seen here is the Gwai River and the Shangani River. There are a number of other rivers that run into it, which are generally, these rivers don't run all year round, but there's a lot of water in them, static pools in areas. So the pigeons are able to find water if they look for it. Okay, now move on to the actual race itself, which was held over the weekend. That's Hotspot 4. The race was difficult. It was from this position here, 374 kilometers from Victoria Falls. The winds were not high, but there was a few crosswinds to start with, and from about Lupani the winds were more or less headwind, and the temperatures as we climbed through the day, they did increase, but they weren't exceptionally high, about 28, 29 degrees. We have found from the information that we have on trackers, generally the pigeons need to start to look for water after about 4 hours. And in this case, the leading pigeons came back to the loft in 4 hours and 17 minutes. And we had fairly good returns to start with. We had 115 pigeons in 10 minutes, 417 pigeons in 20 minutes, and 1,033 pigeons in an hour. The a total of 2,918 pigeons were sent to the race, of which 1,807 was in race time by the time the clock was stopped, which is 38% of the birds did not return in normal time. The first pigeon home arrived at 11:17, belonging to Hans Paul Esser. Hans Paul won $6,000. The bird following that was a Dutch pigeon belonging to Jacob Reisma, and the third position was that of Ton de Kobbel from Tower Flowers Loft, also from the Netherlands. Congratulations to those three. There are other prize positions up to 20, which will be published on the website. We have a short clip of the pigeons in the loft. This was taken the day after the return of the first pigeons, and from the clip you can see the pigeons are actually bouncing and looking in reasonably good condition. The later birds are obviously a little bit tighter. We're still having some birds come back. They are getting a lot more rest and recuperation and individual attention to see if we have injuries to attend to and so on. We found at both Hotspot 3 and Hotspot 4 that the pigeons are generally, the later pigeons generally going down after flying for about 4 to 5 hours. And some of those later birds we feel are well equipped for a time when they have no choice but to stop. Hotspot 5 is likely to be a difficult race, because the time on the wing and the conditions will force the pigeons to stop at some point. There is a fair amount of water, but the birds must have learnt to look for it and to drink. The pigeons that have flown right through generally quite dehydrated when they arrive back, but pigeons that are slightly off the pace, 15 minutes or so, come back in a lot better shape, and it's an indication that they have stopped for water on their way in. The trackers will show a really interesting story. Okay, we're now going to move on to the tracking information and see what we've learned from what we've downloaded. We sent 25 trackers to the race, of which 19 returned in race time. We had 13 on the first day, all shown here on the map, and 4 of those pigeons actually stopped, and as shown here, they are the birds that stopped are shown in red and where they've stopped. Of the 19 birds, 9 of them did not stop at all. They flew right from the liberation right through to the loft. If we just move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, on the next slide, the first bird I'll talk about is this tracker here, this one here, and this pigeon was, judging by the time that it was flying, was right in the front pack, and at that point it was passing the gorge below the falls. It appears to have had to be chased by a hawk, and it took evasive action for a while and hid amongst the on the side of the cliff, and it only returned the next morning just after sunrise. The most interesting track that we follow is the one on tracker number 135. This pigeon shows it actually stopped here and took water on the Guai River, and then continued to fly at night, and we will talk about that on a separate slide. Just to run through with you what we found, we've put up all the tracks for that particular pigeon from hotspot 1, 2, 3 and 4. And the interesting thing that we see, the first thing we see is that on both the liberation of 3 and 4, it passed over the liberation point at 2. So that's the first interesting point that we picked up. The next one is that this pigeon has tended to stick to the eastern side, and it's obviously flown with other pigeons, but it's flown in a northerly direction on 2 occasions. The first occasion is from hotspot 2, which passed over the Guai River at this point here. It did not stop, but it continued. It passed over our liberation point, which is the 103, which we toss fairly regularly, and took a line from there back into the falls. Now, the next really interesting thing is that we found on 3 separate races, the pigeons have passed over the liberation points at 103. So you can see here that for hotspot 1 and hotspot 2, hotspot 4, the bird came back over this particular point. Now, at this juncture here, the pigeon did not stop. It went over Guai River, but it must have, maybe it's a coincidence, I don't know. But you can see here that the track that came over here, it may have remembered that area, because when it deviated and started to look for water, it came back to that point on this last race, and that's where it stopped and drank water and stayed for a number of hours. Just zoom out, please. Okay, we can just look at that time. That time there was 11:46 in the morning. That's when it stopped. And when it left, we pick up one of these points here, it left at 23:56, at 4 minutes to midnight. It left that point and started to fly. Now, when you have a look at this again, you'll notice that again, although it was night, it still passed over this point, 103, where it had passed in 2 other occasions. So it's the 3rd time it came over the liberation point. And at that point, it must have been 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, the other interesting thing to note is that when this happened, there was no moon. It's pitch dark. The only light that there's available was the stars, and and the moon came up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And the pigeon continued to fly. It turned and went over the town of Wankie, which has obviously got some lights around. It never stopped, but it continued to fly in a westerly direction to this point here. And around about 2 a.m. in the morning is when the moon came up. The moon started to appear, and it's a very small moon at the moment. So there's not much light at all. At that point, the pigeon circled and then took a bearing back to the loft. So the pigeon continued to fly north, obviously when it had got its bearings correct. And when it arrived in Victoria Falls, it passed almost directly over the top of the loft. But that was at about 4:45 in the morning. It then ended up in the town and it stopped there. Sunrise is at 6:45 in the morning. Soon after sunrise, it flew back to the loft and clocked just after 7. Very interesting information. Okay, I think the information we're getting from the Sky Leader tracker rings is very valuable, and we're just very grateful to Sky Leader for sponsoring us in this venture. In conclusion, I just want to mention that the big competition is still coming up. We are well set in the Ace Bird competition, and we have a prize pot of $600,000. We still have 715 pigeons in the competition. The ones that have not clocked in any of the previous races are no longer in the competition, and it's proving to be a fairly stiff competition with 3 birds reasonable margin in their points. The first of which is Hardy Kruger, which is leading with his bird Kito. It's 36 points ahead of the second bird, which is Millie's Loft of the UK, and in third place at the moment is WY Lofts of the United States. So we look forward to the up and coming 5th Hotspot and the final, and we wish you the best of luck.